You are listening to the Third Person Podcast, and I am your host, Colin Cummings. Joining me today, as always, is my managing editor, Logan West.
Hey, what's up? I'm on a different mic.
I can hear that.
I sound differently.
You sound distant. Are you still here, Logan?
Oh, yeah.
Are you close?
Yeah, I'm just like a disembodied voice, like above the basement house, so just on the first floor.
Right. Okay. So it's on the regular floor.
Yeah.
Excellent. I forgot to ask a question. I also have guests to introduce, but I forgot to ask how to pronounce Ben's last name. Ben, how do you pronounce your last name?
I get all kinds. Gelina is usually the one.
Okay.
Some people say Gelinas, but I don't like it because it kind of sounds dirty. So. Gelina. And the first name Ben.
Ben, gotcha.
With like a hard N.
Right. Okay. So Ben Gelina? Okay. Yeah. We're going to rewind. Introducing Ben Gelinas as our first guest, writer and editor from Mass Effect, Dragon Age, BioWare, and also working on his own game now, too.
Yeah. I worked on 4 games at BioWare total, and
nice.
Now I'm in Toronto.
Excellent.
Doing my own thing.
Sweet. Striking out on your own, independent style.
That is too cool. That is too cool.
It's too terrifying as well, but yeah.
Excellent. And also, I have the pleasure of introducing Sophia Park.
That's me. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Readers of the site will know Sophia from Arc Symphony fame and local host fame, from which we have 2 articles up about. You've probably read them because that's the only thing people really read on our site. Yay!
You're so mean to yourself.
No, it's because those are the things that are most resonant with our audience currently.
Right. Yeah. Everybody loves the Arc Symphony article, particularly. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, sorry, go ahead. I was interrupting you.
I was just going to say that I like to say Ben's name like my Sharona. Ben Gelinas.
It works.
It does work.
That's not how you say it.
So we are here to talk about one specific topic, which we'll get to. But right now, we're just going to talk about our weeks. Logan, tell me about your week.
I got sick, went to school, and built a PC.
That's a busy week.
Yeah. It's been okay.
Yeah?
Yep.
How's your PC building?
My processing power has increased 3-fold.
From how many folds?
I am becoming more powerful.
Good. Excellent. And everything's working? You didn't run into any snags?
Yeah, so far. I've only had it like up for 2 days, so we'll see. Yeah.
Any perlator mishaps?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Oh, yeah, it's perlator.
Yeah.
It's perlator.
I mean, I didn't realize I was paying for delivery to the post office. I thought it was to my door. I don't know.
Yeah, they kind of miss the boat a lot, or the door a lot.
They missed the delivery truck.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Or did I miss the delivery truck? I'm not sure.
Ben, how about your week? Tell me about it.
I wake up. I'm also working on like a freelance project for Dark Horse that I can't talk about yet.
Okay.
And so this week has been waking up, doing that.
Nice.
Going to one show. And that's been my week. So I went to the hotelier show.
Okay.
But
like a writing thing for Dark Horse?
Sort of.
Dude,
Yeah.
you can't talk about it.
I know.
He just said I can't talk about it.
Soon.
Yeah.
Soon? Or soon?
I'm not sure how soon.
Okay.
I don't get to. Yeah.
That's okay. I'll stop plugging for hints.
It's not a comic.
Okay. Sophia, how about your week?
A lot of things, actually.
Excellent.
I've been doing some writing contracts, a few commissioned pieces. I've been doing some of the local host press circuit, which usually involves, more podcasts, occasional interviews, like phone interviews, or, when you release a game, like often there's waves of people who just like barge into your DMs like, hey, we should talk about this.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I like talking about me, so why not? But yeah, it's been mostly freelance work and a lot of the press circuit for localhost, but as well as like the next project, getting the pre-production in order.
Right. I want to comment on how fast you guys put Arc Symphony and then localhost together. Like you said, you emailed me being like, "Hey, we have a new game localhost," and I was like, "Arc Symphony just came out. How did you do this?
Oh my god!
How did you do that?"
Okay, so Arc took about a month and a half to make.
Yeah.
Localhost is it's bigger than Arc. It's about 15,000 words. I'm not sure why that's that measurement, but and it took about 3 weeks.
Okay. Whoa.
It was July 28th when we first talked about the premise of the game. Like, oh, what if there was one body and 4 drives and you had to find the owner of the body? That was our conversation, me and Penelope. And then August 21st is when we went gold.
Right.
And so in between that was the worst crunch of my life. It was just 14-hour days on my couch. I would sleep on my couch, wake up, work, go to bed on my couch.
Oh my god.
Because we were commissioning it for BitBazaar because we had a table there
Right.
at the CNE, and we were thinking, what can bring people to this table? And so to me, it was like, we should just make a new game. We should just have a game ready. And we had this idea, and it was like, what if we just used a lot of the old code we had, so that, like the engine for Twine that we had, and what if we use that to churn out a story that was very short, but it ended up, as usual, becoming very long. And so yes, Loco ended up eating up my life for the month of August.
Oh my god.
But it's been really great and promising, and I'm really happy with the reception. And it's got me really excited for the next project.
Awesome. That's really cool. And you guys are already thinking about something else?
We have the premise, the scaffolding. We have a wiki, a repository for code management and everything.
Okay.
We have the structures in place, but I don't expect it to be out for a while. It's going to be significantly bigger.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about folds, 3-fold bigger, 5-fold bigger. How do
You're talking
folds
about
work?
Folds?
He was talking about folds.
I
in
don't
terms of
remember
his-
talking about folds.
I only know Ben.
Oh, my processing power.
Yeah, processing
That
power. You said you're 3-fold
bigger.
more powerful in your CPU. So
That's not like talking about folds. That's talking about processing power.
that's true. How much is a fold?
Like,
Is it 10 times? 20? 1,000?
so how much bigger is your game going to be?
About 4 teraflops bigger.
Oh my god!
Okay, that's actual numbers.
Coming to the Xbox One X this fall in 4K.
If they asked, I'd say yeah. Why not?
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Arc Symphony and localhost were something special, so I'm excited to see what you do with something even bigger than that. Ben, you're also working on a indie title.
Yes.
Recent indie developer.
2, in fact. And somehow I'm juggling those with this other project too.
Nice.
So, and coming from development cycles that are years long, I was in awe watching Sophia finish that game that quickly.
You were making faces when she was like, yeah, it's done in 3 weeks. And you were like, what? No,
Yeah.
that's impossible.
Like an art asset is done in 3 weeks. Yeah. So like, I'm working on 2 projects. One is much smaller and one is a little bigger. I'm actually readying a demo this month for the smaller one. It's called Speed Dating for Ghosts.
Okay, yeah, I saw you talk about it on Twitter. What's it about?
Speed Dating for Ghosts.
Excellent. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's self-descriptive.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then basically you just play as a ghost who's feeling kind of lonely. So you go to a speed dating event and meet other ghosts. But my ghost universe is kind of half exactly what you'd expect, where it's just these spectral beings after they've died existing in tandem with people who are still alive. But I sort of see the ghosts in these universes embodying who they were in life.
Okay.
So everybody's a monster basically of a different sort that sort of reflects their core being.
Right.
And yeah, you get to know them, and so you'll like you can court a spirit of vengeance if you want, or a mischievous poltergeist, and get to know them. And I'm trying very hard to make it a game where it's not about banging,
Right. Yeah.
because you're ghosts. There's not a lot of ghost banging.
No, they're all corporeal forms. So,
Yeah,
banging is not on the table
so
or
it's all-
anywhere actually.
It's more like ghost friends, but but not entirely,
Right.
depending on the ghost.
Platonic ghost dating things.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Yeah, and basically, it's just like me going crazy with weird.
Weird word stuff.
Yeah, because
Nice.
working for a AAA company, you get to be really creative, but within that box.
Yeah, there's a box.
And now I have no box,
Excellent.
Other
And it's
than-
free.
other than the fact that I have to have a demo
Right.
to show in a box that is a computer in
boxes.
a few weeks. So yeah. And then the other game is a longer thing that is still sort of in pre-production, but it's about space journalism.
Nice. Whoa.
So-
Okay. Tell me more about space journalism.
Journalism in space. Basically, I before I worked in games, I was a reporter at
Okay.
a newspaper, and so and I love science fiction,
Right.
and so I was like, there's not a lot of representations of journalism at all in video games, and so I thought, I
Agreed, says the journalist.
yeah, so I figured it'd be fun to kind of imagine a world where, like, basically make my own futurescape, and then you play as an intern journalist in this futurescape,
Okay.
and you learn about the world through that. I'm kind of burnt out on making games about that include combat and killing people. So I've been trying to think of ways to kind of go around that and tell stories or come up with game mechanics that really have nothing to do with shooting people.
Right.
And journalism, and it seems like a good way to kind of complicate conversation systems, because interviews are a very different thing from just talking to someone.
That's true.
In a character. And so, so I'm having fun with that.
That's awesome. I really like that premise. It sounds a lot like Valhalla, sort of up that alley of Valhalla is the cyberpunk bartending simulator. So sort of that modern day job, but thrown into the future and like trying to figure out what it would be like.
I didn't know this game existed, and I'm curious now.
Check out. It's by
Sukuban Games.
Sukuban Games.
We would tell you to check out our own article on it, but somebody didn't finish May or June backlog challenge one.
Why didn't you do that?
Oh, it wasn't me.
No, he's looking at me.
Yeah.
I'm trying to write an article on Valhalla. I just haven't yet. But I came up with a really bomb title, so it's sitting there in my head because I came up with the title of "Do Androids Dream of Electric Beats?"
That's good.
Like the vegetable?
No, like music beats.
No. Do they dream of the root vegetable?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they'd wonder what it tastes like.
It's true. Yeah,
For sure.
no, they're curious.
Well, it's like, does electric sheep make any sense?
Well, because the novel from.
I'm aware.
Yeah,
but I mean,
yeah.
like,
I guess electric sheep doesn't make sense either.
But yeah, I'm a big fan of games that focus on. I'm gonna put this train right back on the tracks. I'm a big fan of games that like will take a interesting setting,
right,
and put the player in it in a way that they're not necessarily the main character of that setting.
Right.
They're seeing the setting go by in a way that they're exposed to it and they're affecting it, but they're not like.
They're not the protagonist.
Yeah.
They're
the bartender, or
the shopkeeper,
or the person that's checking passports to go into the country,
right?
Or
papers, please, and such. Yeah.
So
they are the rumor having NPC who you're like, thanks for the rumor, bye.
What's next?
Yeah,
I think there's something valuable to be said about existing in a world where you're not driving the world. I've always enjoyed like AAA titles that have a bit of that element. Like for instance, like. Part of my favorite parts about Morrowind from Bethesda. Do I have to say that? Does everybody know what Morrowind is? Of course, right?
Continue.
Morrowind from Bethesda.
The Elder Scrolls series.
Yeah, there you go. Is how when you start that game, you're just an actor in a huge world, and you don't necessarily push the world forward. You have to exist within a world that's already being pushed forward by something else, right? So I feel like that's valuable in a role-playing setting for sure. In that sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think it's valuable because games and films often work within like a set of consequences and stakes that we don't really interact with in real life. Like, the biggest punishment in a game is like someone died and they're taken from you, and that means, oh, I'm hurt now. Whereas like one death in real life is like a life-shattering event. And like, if someone got into a car accident, like we freak out. It's like in real life, the smallest events change everything, but we kind of dream about it in media where everything's action and everything is intense, and because of that, everything is sort of dulled in media. And so I'm curious about what happens when we close that gap, when games sort of take the everyday life we live and zoom in to a way where, let's just say, like, so if one person died, we would spend the whole game on that.
Yeah. Make the mundane extraordinary.
And I think that as we make games that are more like that, the smaller consequences then come to matter more for the players who are now invested in that world from the perspective that we give them, right? And like I've been rewatching a lot of ER recently, and the first few seasons of ER are fantastic because they go, okay, well, this is an emergency room. We're gonna have the conflict that actually happens in an emergency room for the most part. These different like discussions about end of life care and like realistic traumas, car crashes, and we're gonna put interesting characters, and we're gonna in this setting, and we're gonna have these characters interact with this conflict.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh man, I'm suddenly really invested in this this case of this guy who has a DNR, but they really feel like but the kids want to keep the the guy alive, you know, and that's a small thing. And
But
then
it's a moral it's a conflict of conscience.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting one that happens often.
And in the case of the setting, it's very appropriate and you care a lot. And then later they start dropping helicopters on people on that show. And it's like suddenly that little conflict doesn't matter as much because you're seeing these explosions. And then you're like, okay, when's the next explosion?
I totally agree with that. It's one of the things I think about when I compare Sherlock, the BBC Sherlock, with Elementary, the one on ABC or whatever network it was on. I liked Elementary way more because Sherlock because they just had those 3 episode seasons, like the stakes had to get higher and higher every time, and they were so like, oh my god, the world's ending, only Sherlock can save us. And like it was so nice when Elementary was like, no, this is our crime of the week, a guy murdered a guy, let's figure out what happened. Like it just felt, it was more, I guess, like the whole like monster of the week or crime of the week like happens often in these procedural shows, but it feels more realistic just because that's what day-to-day is. Honestly,
I took the opposite approach, like in terms of watching both of those shows. Like I really liked Sherlock for the fact that, like, you know, he was saving the day and that the single crime that he was trying to solve was that much more important. But I definitely get what you're saying in terms of like, you know, that's not really what being a detective is like.
Yeah. Right? It just got too fantastical.
Right. Yeah. For sure. And like he shouldn't be solving like just based on my program where I'm coming from what I'm going to school for right now, he shouldn't be solving like all of London's problems without even having like a private investigator's license, for instance, like let alone not even being a card carrying member of the police force. Right. So I get you there.
Yeah.
I guess
it's one of those like, oh, like, I mean, he like fakes his own death and does all these things and all these internet theories. And I'm just like, oh, please just solve the fun little murders and mysteries and that Arthur Conan Doyle came up with in the beginning.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Just seemed like too much.
And similarly, but completely not similarly at all, this is why I've also really liked any Star Trek, really.
Oh, yeah.
It's because it's about procedure and it's about like the denial of nihilism in space. Like, I'm watching Enterprise right now, and it's actually really good, and it's surprising me a lot. But Captain Archer in that series, he almost like he cares about one life so much that he can risk his entire ship on it.
Right.
Like in the wake of like the humanity's first experience in space, like his reaction is, no, every life counts. Like I need this person, and when anyone is even threatened, like it really shakes him up. But also Picard felt that way too in the first season anyway, where like even the threat of losing somebody was like it could ruin like the entire month or the entire year. Like it would haunt him. Whereas like by the time Star Trek Next Generation ends, it's like, oh yeah, I just experienced an entire life in 5 minutes and whatever.
Yeah, that's a Saturday. Like it's you actually just recently tweeted out the chronological order for all the Star Treks?
Yeah, that was me today.
Yeah, that was you today. Yeah, which is super cool. I was like saw that and I was like, maybe I'm gonna watch all the Star Trek. I mean, my favorite is still Voyager, and
that's a good pick.
Because like I mean Janeway's such a good captain, and I like the stories they tell in it. Like I mean, compared to like Next Generation or even the original Star Trek, like I just find that I connect more with the characters, more with the stories that they're telling, and it kind of hit this middle sweet spot of like, it was telling really good sci-fi in a time where nothing really was. Especially in the whatever years that was, like 2000 and whatever. Yeah, Voyager's still my favorite.
Speaking of telling really good sci-fi stories.
Oh, right, yeah. Mass Effect? Is that where we want to go?
The big ticket item here.
Is that the transition that we're using?
I think so.
Cool. Well, we're here today to talk about Mass Effect and all of the things there within.
Mass Effect Andromeda.
Yeah, Andromeda specifically. I have the most experience with 1 to 3, so I'll bubble along in those.
Excuse me?
I mean, in comparison to your Andromeda's experiences at the table.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I have very little Andromeda experience. But we wanted to get the ball rolling by asking, sort of what's your first take that you had for Andromeda? I mean, when it was first announced, your experience with the series from 1 to 3, sort of like go around the table and just kind of talk about what Andromeda was for us when it was first announced and when we first started playing it. Ben.
When I first started playing Andromeda,
or working on it, I could.
Yeah,
specify.
I mean both.
Yeah.
Because you ideally should play the game as you're working on it too. I came right off Dragon Age Inquisition onto Andromeda. I guess 2 years before it shipped.
Right.
And I worked on the game a lot in the narrative space. So I worked as an editor and later as a writer as well on the game. And I guess I should explain that the role of editor at BioWare is a very kind of unique thing within AAA games, where it's essentially you're essentially acting like an editor would at a magazine
Right.
or a newspaper, in that the writers are turning in drafts to you, and then you're going through them first substantively, and then after discussions, you're also going through in sort of a copy editing
Right.
capacity as well, and liaising with downstream teams like localization and voiceover to make sure that they are fully abreast of what each scene and each character is all about, and often on a line by line basis what these lines mean, how they should be delivered. And on the front end, if I back up all the way to the beginning, editors also work in the early stages to sort of hammer out some of the kinks in the story, and in key arcs. Editors are often paired with writers, and they on particular story arcs or character arcs,
Right.
and see them through. So I ended up doing both writing and editing on Andromeda. And on the writing side, I like to call Drac my stepson, because I worked on him with Anne Lemay, who created him.
Yeah.
Wait, so how old are you then? If Drac is like ancient.
Eternal.
Oh gosh.
Ben is eternal.
So yeah, so that's sort of my experience pre-release, and we can get into post-release as well. But but I also I've been talking a bit. So yeah.
No. What about like Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah. What was
Oh.
your experience with the series leading up to Andromeda?
So when 1 and 2 came out, I was still a reporter at a newspaper,
Right.
and only played games, did not make them at all in any capacity. I was a crime reporter.
That is so cool.
And it was a very different job, but actually had a lot of transferable skills, weirdly. And yeah, I liked 1 a lot, and I loved 2. 2 remains, like, if I hadn't worked at BioWare, 2 remains in that top 10 for me. And so I came to BioWare while they were finishing up 3, and I joined the team there. I
Nice.
started on Dragon Age, but then Mass Effect needed me, so I worked on only the crunch portions of Mass Effect 3, basically, and cut my teeth on that game.
Nice. Sophia.
Hi.
Hi. What's your Mass Effect
Okay.
experience? That's what I'm looking
So-
for.
I didn't know a single thing about Mass Effect when Andromeda was announced, or even when it was released. I was just sort of curious. But I got more curious when it started getting dunked on. And I remember I work out of Gamma Space, a co-working studio here in Toronto, and I was speaking to some of the people I work with, and I was wondering, like, is it Mass Effect Andromeda actually like is any of these criticisms I hear about the tone, about the problems it has, are they founded? And at first, everyone I was working with tended to say, no, it's great. But then the more they played, the worse their reception got.
Right.
And so I got even more intrigued. And so I was like, I need to understand why people are reacting so strongly to this game. But I didn't know a single thing about Mass Effect. So I spent the next 3 months playing the first 3 games
Right.
back to back to back with all DLC. So I could be like, okay, here's why Mass Effect is great. And I came to have my own love for the series. And then I started Andromeda, and it was like, oh, turns out that all of this criticism was totally unfounded. It was just because, time had sort of changed what Mass Effect was to people.
Right.
And so they seem to imagine something different, but Andromeda is totally faithful.
Mhm.
And I guess by that point in time, the game had become so patched that maybe the problems that were there I didn't quite see, but I didn't really have a single bug or error or animation glitch, or nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was just like a good game.
There's like 2 conversations to have just off that point, and the one is games coming to games way later after they've come out and experience them with patches or like playing Mass Effect 3 without the DLC and playing Mass Effect 3 with the DLC. 2 completely different games. And like the 3's DLC recontextualizes so much of that game in such a positive way. Or like even just post patch, like fixing mistakes like that. But also talking about had another question. I lost it. I will remember it. Logan, what's your experience with Mass Effect?
I'm going to take you all the way back to the launch of Mass Effect 1. It was like, I can't remember specifically. I must have been November because we had a crazy ice storm in the tiny little town of Smith Falls, Ontario.
I remember that ice storm.
And
I brought you your copy of Mass Effect.
I'm telling the story, dude.
Sorry, I'm spoiling it.
You were lucky enough to get your copy not mailed to you. I think you went with your dad or something and picked it up because we were.
I dragged my dad somewhere. Yeah,
right. So
I needed Mass Effect.
But selflessly, like a hero, when my copy didn't come in because of the ice storm, because it was being mailed, you drove your copy over to my place, so I was able to play it on release night. And then it was a snow day the next day, so I got to play it all through the snow day, and then the copy actually did come in that day.
Yeah.
So then we met up and drove it back to your place. But and
I'm glad I feature so prominently in one of these stories.
Oh yeah, it was really great. It was probably one of my like favorite Mass Effect memories. Was like not thinking I get to play it after hyping it up so intensely. Like we had absolute crap internet at my parents' country house, and that didn't stop me from like clicking refresh on the forum page that they had set up in advance of the first game launching. Just looking at all the classes and speculating with you guys at school, being like, I'm going to pick Infiltrator because I'm pretty sure that the pistol isn't going to be that much of a drawback. I'm going to do pistols and snipers. That's what I'm going to do.
Oh, good old high school.
And that was like one of my favorite memories. Really not too much to do with the game. Of course, the game was awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed 1, 2, and 3. And then I played the crap out of 3 multiplayer, like long after that game had kind of like left the main stage, I guess you could say, in terms of like multiplayer.
There was 12
games.
people who did, and you were one of them.
Yeah, 100%. I really love the multiplayer in Mass Effect 3, and I guess I'll roll into Andromeda with a positive point. I really like the multiplayer in Mass Effect Andromeda. They had some issues, but just connection stuff, which easily fixed over time, right? As for how it fits in with the rest of the Mass Effect series, there's something about the scope or the scale or the theme or something, and it's hard to put my finger on. I've developed some questions to ask you guys about it, but I guess it was like what you were saying that Sophia, Mass Effect has become something a little bit different for its audience now. Maybe that's the case. Or maybe it's a little bit different. I don't know.
I have 2 points.
Okay.
First of all, I find it very strange that you went into Mass Effect 1 focused on the combat.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
It was like, I need to use the sniper rifle. Like, to me, it was like I chose engineer and I walked around with a pistol on casual because I was like, I'm here for the story. Like, Mass Effect is about me acting out a movie trilogy. It's not about me like slaughtering dudes with my like jackhammer or something.
Well,
like,
I mean, that's half of it, though, right? There's dudes to slaughter.
And point 2,
we were also 15.
Yeah.
the best way I can describe Andromeda is that it's 6 seasons of a TV show spinned off of like a movie trilogy. Like it's like you do these isolated story vignettes down little pathways, and we don't really reference them, but it's like vaguely serialized. Like we might call back to it once, but you're just sort of, you come in, you do an episode, you leave. You come in, you do an episode, you leave. And that's sort of how I played it too, where it was like these 1 hour bursts.
Okay, so I can get behind that assessment of the game. The thing is, to me, is that like it's, as you said, it's a spin-off series from a movie trilogy, right? And I think people maybe were expecting movies, not a spin-off series.
That totally warrants all of the criticism.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
you really nailed it.
I think and this conversation has helped me discover just what you said specifically about the serialized nature of the missions and stuff like that and the stories. That's why it didn't feel right. And you're right, individually, they're all really, really, really good. But I think that when you take them as part of a whole, that whole feels lacking because we're used to a single cohesive story built up of many different stories rather than serialized retellings, right?
There's a cohesion that the game lacked.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
That's in comparison to Mass Effect 1 to 3. Like it had a certain way. It had a story, and in the way it told that story was the same for each one of them. Well, Andromeda wanted to tell a different story, and it wanted to tell it in a different way. So when people were expecting 1 to 3, they were like, "Whoa! Where's my movie? I don't want this TV thing.
Where's my movie? That's the Mass Effect.
But the TV thing's not bad. It's
right.
just a different.
Yeah.
But people were expecting something different.
Yeah.
And when I look at Andromeda and compare it to the trilogy, I kind of go back a little bit to what I said earlier about games where the setting is you are in the setting rather than you are the setting. And I see Andromeda as a little bit more like you are like that the galaxy is the main character, and you're experiencing that galaxy rather than going in there and immediately being like I am God. I am going to do everything.
I mean, Shepard was a chosen soldier who like had a military background and was like going into this with a certain mentality and had a certain way of talking to people and a certain way of dealing with situations. While Ryder is such more of a optimist and so much more kind of a dork, and he or she is like they're explorers. They're not soldiers.
Andromeda's a coming of age story.
Yeah.
And the Mass Effect original trilogy is so not a coming of age story.
No, Shepard's already come of age.
Shepard is like the Master Chief, like a mythological figure in progress. Like you're watching the legend fold out, but it's also like a really great sci-fi trilogy from like the 80s or something. Whereas like Andromeda is focused more on like Sarah Ryder has a really bad relationship with her dad, but she went with him in the hopes of a new beginning somewhere else, and she's coming to learn how to be a person after she loses him and has to fill the role. Like it is so purely about youth and about new beginnings, whereas like the Mass Effect trilogy concerns like the threat of synthetic life forms. Like Andromeda takes that threat and it merges them together. Like Sarah Ryder is like Sam and a human in one person, and this hybrid figure enters a new universe trying to find like a better way. And it's about like, can we find that new home, or can the ties we had bring it down with us? Like, and so it's so hopeful and so optimistic, especially in like the year we've had here, that it's something we really need right now in science fiction.
No, I totally agree. That's a really good way of putting it. It's like interactions with the crew and interactions with the world itself. Like even when we talk about gameplay mechanics, like the way you're building up new colonies, the way you're introducing new life forms to each other, the way you're trying to broker peace for this age-old conflict with these other two races. A lot of this has hope and optimism, and like even when you think about like Ryder flirting with the pilot and doing so in a terrible dorky fashion, like she's just trying to get at least I'm gonna keep saying she because I played Ryder as a girl. She's just trying to find her footing.
Like I think it's important that we distinguish the difference here between Shepard and Ryder. Shepard, it's like they are the commander, but whoever they are is refracted through your playthrough. Scott and Sarah Ryder are different people. Like they have different personalities. A lot of the lines are the same, but the deliveries change who they are. And especially since, like, spoiler alert, don't like just cover your ears. Later in the game, like near the end, you switch to reboot the Pathfinder as the other twin. You really get to feel who the other twin is and who they are as a character in a way that you don't like with the two Shepards. Like people just argue that this Shepard is real, but no, both Riders are there. It's just who took the mantle changes the story entirely.
And that actually leads me to a question for you all, whoever wants to answer it. Because I kind of, when we were making the game, we had this exact thing in mind. We wanted to give the Riders distinct personalities as brother and sister, and also distinct personalities, whereas Shepard was a lot more of a cipher, a lot more of a, if the players put themselves into the head of this character and feel like they are Shepard in a way that you don't necessarily feel as much with Ryder, because Ryder is a more defined personality. The Riders are more defined. And I wonder if that could have something to do with players' level of engagement with this story versus the three stories that came before it.
That's a really good point.
So for me, one point that keeps getting floated around in my head a lot that I've been hesitant to bring up because they're very different games and they're very different problems between the two different games, but how people were kind of disappointed when the focus shifted. They were a little bit disappointed in Halo 2 when you played the Arbiter a little bit, but they were really disappointed when you played Spartan Locke for half of Halo 5, right? Now, maybe some of that frustration is just like Shepard envy, people missing Shepard, right? I'm still trying to unpack a lot of what made that game iffy for me, like in Andromeda. But maybe that's it. Maybe I wanted to be inside the head of Shepard again. You know, um, that doesn't discount what you guys were going for in terms of like creating distinct separate riders, right? But it's almost like maybe people weren't ready for a Mass Effect game where you weren't putting yourself inside the protagonist.
Especially after especially after 3, like I'm sure people just wanted more of 3 and like the more of the Shepard story. Even though that is an arc that was finished, it was done. Shepard's story is done. Like it was well written and well completed,
which is good and bad, right? Like
Yeah.
I mean that people wanted more of Shepard, but like
Yeah.
maybe that wanting more of Shepard is tied into what Mass Effect is.
That's true.
Yeah, I have a question about Mass Effect 3 specifically, because by the time I had reached Mass Effect 3, personally, I had felt that Shepard had taken too much on. Like, Shepard was the army by that point in time, and it was just sort of egregious. It was like, well, don't we have like so many ships to be doing this right now?
Yeah.
Like, why is this in one person's hands? Like between that and like the fact that like I can't imagine a single human being who wouldn't have like post-traumatic stress disorder after half the things that were happening in Mass Effect 2. Like,
Yeah.
by the point you're in 3, so many devastating things can or cannot happen that it was like I can't imagine anyone actually like being able to process this.
3 is a train of sadness, pretty much.
Yeah, especially if you put Morden in the vents at the end of 2.
Oh god, yeah. I played
Well,
through.
or he
I
lives.
played through 2 once, and I tried to make a fail ship. So like everyone died except for Tally and Legion. Everyone died. So that's
How did you do that?
there's a program that lets you figure out the way to like kill everyone.
I mean, like, how did you keep Tally and Legion and nobody else?
That's again. I maneuvered away so that only Tally and Legion would live. So I just imagined the ship at the end of 2 is just me, Joker, Tally, and Legion just being like, oh fuck.
What a
3 was
sad
interesting. 3 was like, oh, this is not that character. Oh, this is also not that character. Every time someone's supposed to show up, you're like, oh, you're just filling in things. It was a sad
I never
time.
thought about that. The fact that you could like kill everybody off in 2 and then they had to have a bunch of stand-ins for 3.
Yeah, so imagine 3 with no Rex or Garrus or Morden or
what the
or
heck?
Grunt or
Wow.
it was an interesting game.
I mean, like, in my own playthrough of the Mass Effect trilogy, by the time I hit Citadel, it was just a very sad DLC because I was very aware of who wasn't there.
Right.
Like, it was like feeling their ghosts more than like celebrating the story. I was
Wow,
living.
I never thought about that. I like when I played Citadel, everyone's alive, so I was like, "Woo, party times, yay!" And then I never thought about like having lost someone.
And, like the gaps are tangible. Like, you know, people would enter and they would be positioned. Like the composition of the shot would be like, oh, there's 3 people here, but there's only 2.
Oh,
Like it was deliberately constructing the absence of this member in a way that was supposed to make me feel guilty. But I was just playing naturally.
wow, that's dark. Wow, I didn't know Citadel was going to throw dark.
I'm sorry.
Did you work on Citadel?
No, but I'm sorry.
On behalf of BioWare, sorry.
What's kind of funny to me is this idea of the serialization, because it sort of is reflective of the way that these games are made. When I'm saying a lot. When I worked on Inquisition's production was a lot like Andromeda's in some ways, in that you get the high level people that are basically saying how the story goes, what the setting's all about, the themes, and then people go off into their own little sort of corners of this world and this story and construct it separately, and then everything comes together.
Right.
A metaphor that we would cart out all the time is like when you're building a game this big that's story based, it's sort of like you're building an airplane while you're in the air, and you have to somehow figure out how to make it land.
Right.
But everybody's working on their own little piece of the airplane, and you have people saying who are like sort of telling you how to build the airplane, and they have the blueprints, but they can't build the whole airplane themselves when you're making a game this big. And so it's kind of scary because you really, as one person working on a part of the plane, part of the game, you really cannot see the whole plane, and you don't know how it's going to land until it lands. And Inquisition, much like Mass Effect, was built this way, and somehow Inquisition landed a lot smoother than
Mostly intact. Yeah.
than Andromeda did. But from my perspective, I don't see them as being wildly different in quality and experience. Like I worked heavily on both, and I'm as proud of Andromeda as I am of Inquisition. and it's just interesting to see how the reaction is so different to those two games. When arguably when Inquisition came out, it had a lot of bugs too, and there were a lot of rough patches. But it almost felt like when Inquisition came out, fans were willing to look away from the rough patches at the stuff they liked, and when Andromeda came out, they wanted to look. A lot of people wanted to look at the rough patches and ignore the stuff that other people have come to like. And I just it's just an observation.
No, I have a question actually. Do you think it's because that? So two questions actually. Do you think it's because Inquisition looked back on the Dragon Age series and was like, "Hey, we're going to really try to bring a lot of this home. Like, we're going to try to bring a lot of the stories and plot points and characters that you love, like into this nice into the fold and into a nice one cohesive package."
Stop talking about folds, man. We're done.
Well, Andromeda kind of was like literally went off in its own direction, like both figuratively and literally. And it's. Do you think that's because like people are just like, I want more of that story that I love, and then finding a new direction is you're always gonna find resistance? And also like when you were working on Andromeda, like obviously like Inquisition, you probably were very conscious of like the Dragon Age lore and the Dragon Age like existing storyline, and Mass Effect was the same way. So like, how is it working in that sort of context? Like Dragon Age, obviously you carried it on, but Mass Effect was like you were carrying it on, but also in a whole new direction and trying to figure that out.
I've come to think that maybe the scariest thing about game development is anticipation and expectation of players. I wish that I would have had the opportunity to work on a game that is the first game in a series or its own thing, because when you're making a follow-up to a game, immediately the players have expectations for what that game will be. And with Inquisition, it was coming off of Dragon Age 2. So a lot of people were telling me anyway that they wanted to see what we would do in response to that game, which
I love Dragon Age 2.
A lot of people love. And
favorite one.
But I think that DA2 actually had a lot of the same things we're now seeing with Andromeda, where the initial reaction was very caustic, and then it found an audience of, I don't want to say contrarians, but people who appreciated it for what it was. Yeah. And I think Andromeda and Sophia sort of represents this audience. Has found people who enjoy it for what it is, rather than what they were hoping it would be or expected it to be.
Yeah.
But Andromeda is in many ways a logical follow-up to the trilogy, in that it needs to get away from the trilogy. I think that the way that we ended 3, you need to have something new. You need to tell a new story, and the Mass Effect universe is big enough that you can tell all kinds of stories.
I know people keep asking like, well, why don't we just get a crime CSEC game on the Citadel? And it's like, because you don't actually want that, probably.
Well,
you make that new, that would not be the thing you'd actually want.
And that comes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, where it's like you've had these amazing moments that have been ramping up and getting more and more spectacular over the course of the trilogy. So you can't, I don't think you can now pull back and be like, okay, well, you had so much power, now you can have none. So we're rebooting it makes sense, but you still have to have that. You still have to have more.
Yeah.
And in the AAA space especially, it feels like there always needs to be more, and more of everything.
I mean, we like blew up the Reapers and like did a whole bunch of shit at the end of Mass Effect 3, and now suddenly it's like, and now we're gonna go find a planet.
And I think you're seeing it in all kinds of titles, all kinds of follow-ups, where it's just like the follow-up to a game is now needs to be that game, but it has to be also more than that game.
Yeah.
And I worry about the developers.
Every game needs to be the Game of the Year edition for the previous one, but more and also extra.
Yes. So
I feel that like Andromeda is the only sequel that could have existed for the Mass Effect trilogy, because like 1, 2, and 3 are so primarily concerned with the threat of synthetic life that like by the time 3 ends, spoiler alert again, you render your verdict. You determine what the story was to you. What did you like? What did these experiences mean? And you either say like, I want to kill them, I want to like merge with them, or I want to control them. So after those verdicts are rendered, like ignore the fact that like it's technologically like technically impossible to like encompass all those endings in a new series. Just thematically, how can we renegotiate the synthetic organic relationship without someone who is a hybrid, without someone who is somewhere else?
Mhm.
Because the conflicts that are possible after the end of Mass Effect 3 in that universe, they're a lot more. They would have to be a completely different world in itself. Like oh, like synthetic organic life is like synthesized. Now what? Like, how do we revisit that problem? How do we enter new questions? Like, how do we treat it with the reference in the context of our new decade without making some hybrid in some new location?
Yeah.
And that's partly why Andromeda starts when it does, because if you go much further in the story, then suddenly a lot of those questions are a lot more at the front of mind, and it would complicate the narrative even more than it already is complicated. So yeah,
I think the thing there that's coming into my head is that Mass Effect 4 would have been a weird game, but Mass Effect Andromeda, as you say, Sophia, is the right sequel. I can't really picture a world that exists after Mass Effect 4, and I feel like, I don't want to say backed into a corner, but it was like a good
No,
a
they
good final
they didn't
ending.
write themselves into a corner. They wrote themselves to an ending.
Yeah,
They wrote themselves to a
exactly,
period, and we're
exactly.
like, we're done.
Yeah, and there's no real way you can continue on in the Mass Effect world after. Well, you just said that, so I'm just like
Sophia
re-saying
said
that. Yeah, but I don't know if I agree completely in terms of like where a fourth installment in the series could have gone. I think there are like tons of really interesting stories in a universe so big that.
But let me posit this to you. What if they did tell the stories not through a game format, but through books or comics or another medium? Because that's the thing. Imagine Mass Effect 4 trying to play it as a game. Like, what would that look like? I think it makes more sense if you're trying to explore the world after the Reapers.
No, and I wouldn't be, ever. Any story that would have to happen for Mass Effect would have to happen before the end of 3, for sure. Like, any fourth story needs to happen not after 3.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I hate to toss around like prequel or things like that, but like it was really creative how it's like, oh yeah, we're traveling 600 years into the future, but also backwards, but also
To Andromeda.
yeah, that was cool. I didn't think that would work, and then I played it, and that was one of the parts that like worked for me. Was like cool alternate time setting.
and I mean that. To clarify, I'm not saying it's the only thing we could have done.
Right.
Just that after a lot of conversations that were way above my pay grade, that was the story that made the most sense to tell with
Right.
given where we were at and the resources we had.
I have a question about whether or not we can go into Andromeda spoilers yet.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. Spoiler
So-
warning for the listener. There you go.
So Andromeda's optimism is also blanketed by the sheer darkness of the setting. Like the one race, the one species who is there is artificially created by somebody, the Jardan, I believe. And so the question after Andromeda ends is, well, why are we alone out here? Like, how are we coming to find a home in a place that was designed to kill everything in it? That was that only produced one species, and they're not even organic in any way. Like they come to make a home in a place that's so hostile to life that it's just denying extinction. And I think that just makes it even more like apparent like how appropriate it is for this decade and this time, because we seem to be getting darker and darker in our real life like cybernetic, like cyberpunk dystopia.
Yeah, no, the dystopia is real, unfortunately. Ben, I have a question for you. How does that, what Sophia was talking about in terms of like this balancing the optimism and this darkness, a lot of it comes from similar tropes that we've seen in the original Mass Effect series. Like a lot of it comes from, I mean, you can immediately draw a line with the Protheans and then the before race and the blah 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 blah. How do you tread that line in terms of like, obviously like the Mass Effect series itself, and also in science fiction, you have tropes that are there for a reason, whether they're interesting or whether they pose good questions or whatever the case may be. How do you kind of thread the needle and try to figure out like, what do we want to, I mean, like, Ryder has a ship that's just like the Normandy. She's also like she has analogs to various party members, but in a different direction. So you try to, how do you figure out that balance of like how Mass Effect do you go? How far do you stray from the original like blueprint?
Well, I mean, you first sit down and say like, okay, what is Mass Effect at its heart, and what could be anything else, but just happened to be in Mass Effect. And so you hit at some key things, and one of them is, of course, memorable characters that are part of your crew that travel with you when you're experiencing these like crazy adventures. So you start there. You got to have a ship. You got to have crew. That to me is core Mass Effect. Whether you're Shepard or Ryder, you're doing that. And then you have sorry,
That's what you're doing.
that's what you're doing in space. And then like that's a hard question to answer though, because I'm coming at this from a perspective very much where I'm not thinking about the big picture when I'm actually working on a
Right.
game like this. I'm thinking about taking these high level ideas of exploration and identity and trying to figure out how those can be portrayed in a particular moment in the game rather than what the entire game means.
Right. Try to boil that down to this is our character moment. Like, what does this mean for these overall themes?
As a developer, unless you're a lead developer, you're not necessarily experiencing the entirety of the game until it is in your
Xbox
or PlayStation at home, or PC.
Available in Origin now.
Yeah. So it's
What? We're not like plugging Origin. They don't pay us.
So it can be hard to sort of articulate these broader themes when I am so like I have blinders on to the characters I worked on, the scenes I worked on, the locations I worked on, with guidance from those who do have those at front of mind all the time.
So how do you take those big things and try to make it a smaller thing that makes sense?
I mean, at first very clumsily, because you'll maybe get some direction that's like you need to really hit at Ryder's inexperience here. But Ryder can't be too inexperienced because then it'll feel like the player is weak, and then the player will feel bad about themselves. But they should still, that narratively, they need to be inexperienced at this moment, because then they're going to learn something that will then let the player feel like they're really coming into their own later.
Right.
But you also need to account for the however many squad mates you've recruited at that point and their opinions on this moment, and you may not really understand the full perspective on squad mate A, B, and C as well as you do the others. So then you got to work with.
This sounds like comic book writing too, like where creators have certain characters and they have to kind of collaborate in terms of like what the characters are.
But think 300 people on one comic book.
Oh my god,
that is really, really long. And so all this sort of meshing of work really can sometimes come together.
Some like games get made with a hope and a dream.
Yeah, and sometimes they come together perfectly, and it's wonderful. And games always benefit from more time. It's why when you see a game that's delayed, it's a good thing. Yeah, because they're working out these kinks. They're making sure that when everything is coming together, it comes together without a lot of noticeable seams, basically. Sorry for hitting that thing.
No, that's okay.
I lost my train of thought a little bit there, though. It basically when we're working with broader themes, though, we have to keep them at front of mind while we're writing these very particular things and figure out how they speak to that broader theme.
Right. What is it, Sophia? What's it like? So, I mean, I asked you in the interview for the article a little bit about writing for localhost, and how you kind of had a lot of dialogue trees to kind of work your way through. How does that knowledge kind of influence your game playing?
Well, we're talking about completely different scales here. I tend to max out at about 2 to 4 hours of playtime in terms of the planning I'm capable of doing as one person within the scope of like a year of development. Whereas I think that these are necessary consequences of working on like bigger interactive media, is that like the trees will quickly get out of your hands. Like there's easily too many things to keep track of without a central repository, and so you always need some sort of scaffolding to work off of, some sort of foundation that you can work within to see the base things you have to refer to or that have to come back later. There's always going to be someone who has the bigger picture because they can't do both the bigger picture and the small picture at the same time.
Yeah.
And so when you work on smaller games, the person who is like de facto creative director can also be working on independent moments. But even on smaller games, if you don't have another writer, your scope will suffer.
Right.
So with localhost, I wrote half of it, like half of the trees. But the ones that I wasn't like writing were way bigger because they didn't have to be programmed, because they didn't have to see the bigger picture, but because I was managing the overall tone and I was programming and implementing. My half of the game ends up becoming a lot less complex because I was just working with, say, like, oh, I know that we have to call back to these variables, so I will make a ton of choices that reference it, or I will make a lot of different things that reflect it. But the sheer the sheer word count will suffer in exchange. So you'll often find that like it's a bit lopsided. Like in localhost, just as an example, half of the story will define your morality or your choices, and the other half will then give you the consequences of it. And it just happened that way because of the way we split the work. So I think when it comes to games, especially BioWare games, you're seeing like the best attempt at keeping it even,
right?
By giving some people the bigger picture and some people the smaller picture to fill in.
That makes sense. Can you speak to Ben? Can you speak to like trying to sort of figure out where the writing goes moment to moment? Like it's obviously like the big picture is decided by Casey Hudson or whoever it is. But
in Andromeda, Mac Welters.
Yes. Yeah. But in like the smaller character beats, like how much control and how much say do you have over like, I think Drax should be like this, or I think in this moment Ryder should actually do this, or when you're thinking about even just like lore or like this planet I think should mean this to this race or this person, what goes into that?
I mean, it depends in a large part on how much it affects the overall arc of the story. When you have a character moment that is very much about the character, it doesn't need as much creative oversight as something that is about progressing that crit path, that main arc of the story. So a creative director will come in and might put their Eye of Sauron on something that is like the beginning of the game a lot more than this romantic dinner between Vetra and Ryder. Just because that romantic dinner between Vetra and Ryder is very much about Vetra and Ryder, not about what it means for Andromeda as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens to be happening in Andromeda as a whole. It's, I don't know why I'm going back to ER here, but it's like, it's
the TV thing.
Yeah, it's Dr. Green and Dr. Corday within the newsroom, within the ER, rather than, how does this affect the emergency room as a whole? So when you're writing those character moments, or you're writing, say, a voice for a character, even, it's very much that's where the individual writers have a lot more control, and it's sort of a feedback loop, though, and that's where I feel like when you add more people to a game, you get a lot of benefits, but then you get a lot of drawbacks that come in, because you do get a lot of ability to get feedback and
more perspectives is always good.
Yeah, and think about almost always good.
Almost always good.
You can hit a point where you have too much feedback, and then everything sort of just it's just polished to nothing, right? But yeah.
Speaking of the character moments, what's one of the favorite ones that you wrote?
Oh, I got to think about that now. It will definitely be something Drac related. Just trying to think of like what would be a favorite thing. I don't know. It's such a. I need to think about that a little bit. I'm going to interrupt.
We'll come back. If you also want to think about, is there a time when you were interacting with another writer or editor and kind of like you disagreed, and like how you kind of figured out that that disagreement on this character or on this moment, like any sort of tension that you had to sort of work out with another person?
See, that's an even harder question because then I got to like, couch it in like, oh, I had a fight with this person and we did not get along. But that was the nature of 90% of my work because as an editor, you are saying, well, I feel like maybe they wouldn't do this, or this feels like off for the voice, or this feels like a choice that maybe you didn't intend goes that way. I would say that I'm pretty happy with the way that Drax introduction shook out because there were a lot of iterations on it, and we weren't sure. First of all, because it came in a little late, we weren't sure how much we could do with Drac actually like bending over and cutting out tooth, and I feel like it really is. It shows a side of Drac that then everything else about Drac tears down.
Yeah, he's just a fun grandpa.
Yeah, but at first he's a
Krogan.
Yeah, and he's scary,
spooky grandpa.
And and then you meet him, and the more you get to know Drac, the more you realize that there's a lot more to Drac than
the email he sends of just you've been sad or whatever. Here's some pictures of guns, but poorly like watermarked and like.
He didn't say that. It's your actual commentary. Like,
okay.
I assume because there's a bracket with the description. I assume that's writer's interpretation.
That's writer's.
I wrote that email, and that's what I was trying to go for there. But
you wrote that.
I wrote all of Drac's emails in a day.
In a day.
Day.
And I basically made a list in my head of emails that I have received from dads, grandpas, and uncles, and tried to make Drac versions of them. So the forward with too many attachments that were attached hastily and poorly. Now I'm trying to remember the other emails, but the sort of blunt as heck email that Drax sends in condolences with condolences when your dad dies. It's also a spoiler.
That's the beginning of the game.
True.
That's the gun one.
That is the gun one. Oh my god, what are the other Drac emails?
There's the one where he's like, you're seeing trouble. Here's some advice I heard about some girl who will be at the foot of your bed if you don't forward this to 3 people.
Yeah, and the scam email was fun.
I was joking.
Yeah,
that's not real.
No, the scam email was fun though. But it's funny because when you work on a game this big, and I think you're seeing it here live, although this won't be live and it's a podcast, your mind sort of, there's so much that you've done and it's all over the place.
Yeah.
And you lose the threads. You're like, oh my God, did I write that? What did I do there? And you remember, you maybe vaguely remember, but because when it all does come together, you start to forget what you wrote and what somebody else wrote and where they met.
Yeah.
To answer the fighting question, my mind went immediately to disagreements over characters and hashing them out in banter instead of going over to that writer and being like, okay, well, I don't necessarily think that you should have taken this character in this direction. Sometimes when we were writing banter, we would hash that out with the characters,
right? Using the characters as like stand-ins
to get to know, like to basically challenge these aspects of these characters and really flesh them out. So there's a lot of conflict in the banters between the different squad mates, and a lot of coming to understand the squad mates through the other squad mates. And I think that's actually a product of that a little bit. And it's funny because like 2 of the writers who get along the best, their characters in the game fight so much, and I don't know where it came from. I was just like playing psychologist while reading their banters.
I gotta say that was probably some of the best storytelling, isn't in your face, like head-on storytelling, was the banter. I don't want to say it was missing from other games, but I definitely felt like characters were changing even when I wasn't talking to them. When they were talking to each other, they were going through their own changes, like emotionally and like just in perception and perspective, which was really cool because again, it adds into that thing that I really crave, which is a world moving outside of me.
Well, you see when you go back to the Tempest, and it's like your party members move around, they talk to each other, they have little vignettes of conversation. Like they move on without you compared to Shepard, who's like, everyone's standing there like, is Shepard going to come talk to me?
I wonder what Shepard's going to
move. I have to keep doing calibrations.
Yeah.
And we tried to give characters opinions that didn't necessarily have anything to do with Ryder, but would be interesting nonetheless because they would flesh out them as characters that are existing in this world. So like everybody seemed okay with Sam, and I was like, Drac needs to not be okay with Sam. Drac needs to be weirded out by this idea of like an AI in your head, like, because that's weird. And so I guess that is actually an example of speaking directly to the plot, but it allows you to sort of learn more about the character through that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like the crew in Andromeda felt more like a family than any of the original trilogy did. They felt like a bunch of badass friends together, but like the crew in Andromeda feel more tight knit, especially with like even
Right.
the pilot and the engineers. And
I gotta say,
the
I agree with
peripheral
that
folks.
big time. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I felt like I was more on a ship of friends than squad mates,
Mhm.
right? Which was cool. So we talked a lot about comparing Andromeda to Mass Effect 3 and 1, 2, and 1. Don't know why they were in a weird order like that. Thanks, brain. And then we talked a little bit about Sophia.
About me.
No, well, yeah, a little bit about playing a game with those really, really early bugs and how that can kind of like temper your experience a bit. I was just going to say a little bit about how I didn't used to care about graphics in gaming. I was more focused on gameplay and story, right? But then I got to say, part of the really important part of Mass Effect for me is those conversations and the facial animation thing. I know it's been done to death and it's like a big, oh, well, it's fixed now. That really took me out of it a little bit. So how was your experience different, Sophia, because you played it like a little bit later than I did?
I played it in like May or June, I believe. And by that point in time, I think they had repatched the animations entirely,
Right.
and so there were less algorithmically designed passages in the story, and there were a lot more that were handcrafted. I think in reaction to the coverage that it was getting, because it seemed to be the ones that were getting the most renovation work were the ones that were most used for memes about the game.
Yeah.
The memes. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that. I think that a lot of the problems, even though I have problems with Mass Effect Andromeda, I feel like a lot of the problems these days with a lot of games are like memed to death and just overblown, and it's just too much sometimes.
It's the nature of the industry right now. I mean, I remember the thing I forgot way long ago. When you're talking about playing Andromeda later, that's the issue too with games now is that, especially this year, which is a good and a bad thing, we've had so many good games this year that the not great games immediately kind of get shuffled off,
right,
into the ether.
or right under the microscope.
Yeah, one of the two. Like, I mean, Mass Effect Andromeda came out earlier in the year, and then was immediately followed by like Horizon Zero Dawn and Breath of the Wild and Nier Automata and all these games that just had such critical acclaim that you're like, I know it has its positives, but I got this other stuff, and it's hard to kind of
right. Yeah.
But also, like, it's a consequence of how long Andromeda is, and if the development diaries on Kotaku are to be believed, the amount of time it actually got, like, I believe the quote given was that it was about like the last 18 to 24 months of development was the bulk of the game, and Andromeda is easily 60 to 100 hours long.
Yeah,
it's like
it's
in my playthroughs of Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, each were about 20 hours. I've heard people say that they spent longer in each, but roughly about the same.
Yeah.
I didn't spend too long in Andromeda, and I was still hitting 75 hours. And so, how do you actually make a game with that much cinematic content without relying on algorithms, without sort of exposing the internals of the system that they use to put these characters in place to talk to each other, without reusing those same animations?
It's a perfect example. I mean, when you saw we saw with No Man's Sky. I mean, it's their whole like, we have 18 quintillion planets, and you're like, but what's on them? This is the thing.
Just a bunch of blue and brown muck.
I mean, No Man's Sky also a year later has gotten way better.
Totally, and now I'm actually considering buying it.
It's actually more like it should have been at launch. But Mass Effect Andromeda is the same way. I think my biggest problem with Andromeda was that it just had too much scope. It just had too much. I didn't like the move to the open world. I didn't like that in Inquisition either. I liked the more tighter narrative focus of Dragon Age 2, of Mass Effect 2. So kind of making, hey, here's a whole thing that has these gaps of like not so great content, of the fetch quests, of the sort of the boring bits, kind of dragged down the experience for me. Just because that was the part I liked about Mass Effect 2 and Dragon Age 2.
Was that there weren't those fetch quests?
Yeah, it was everything had it was an immediacy. There was a story to tell, and they told it. And like, I appreciate that Andromeda was kind of going for this exploration aspect and going for this kind of, and again, we call back to the TV movie thing, but it has more of a you take your time in it. You kind of want to like envelop yourself in it and kind of dive into the world. And I wanted to do that, but I think there were just between some of the technical glitches and some of the beginning not being as strong of a hook as compared to Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, just kind of, and then new games coming out just kind of made me fall off Andromeda.
Right.
But this is actually one of the reasons why I want to do the podcast, because I kind of want to go back to it.
Well, and like the biggest thing for me that's coming out of this podcast is unpacking how I feel about this game, and it's been really, really, really useful for me. So thank you. But also, I feel like I'm actually going to go back and play it more now, because I realized that like part of my problem was when I was playing 1, 2, and 3, I was playing them because, as you say, there's not so many fetch quests. Well, okay, other than 1.
Yeah.
There's so much to do on every planet in 1. And I'm a
Yeah.
completionist, right? So completing 1, 2, and 3 to 100% meant something different than how I'm trying to play Andromeda, completing what's much more,
Yeah.
like Radiant quests.
I
and,
need
like,
to fight
fetch
that
quests.
urge to go to every icon.
Right. And I think that if I approach it more like a TV show where I'm just in for the episodes, I'm going to have a much better time, in further playthroughs. Because
That's the thing I had with Inquisition. When it came out, I played it in one sitting.
Right,
I sat
right.
down for 36 hours straight and didn't move and played it. And
Really?
that's not the way to play Inquisition,
No.
but that's the way I played it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I kind of came up with a cooler opinion than most on Inquisition.
Yeah.
To the fact that actually I played for 36 hours, didn't beat it, and then a year later came back and played the last 4 hours.
I feel like that's what it's going to be like for me with Andromeda. Like, I have sunk 60 hours into completing everything up to basically 80% of the game, right? I have sunk that much time. Oh, and I don't even want to talk about multiplayer because I've played so much multiplayer, because it's basically
That's
just
a different beast entirely.
Oh,
but
it's
yeah.
so much fun. It's so much fun. You love the multiplayer, right, Sophia?
It's okay. I mean, like it's a little. There's not much to do. It's like
I love wave-based horde combat.
there's like you gotta go kill the guys, and then you kill guys. And he's like, go work, or he's like, oh no, they're stronger now, and I gotta do it, but it's silver now. It's like the loop is there, and yeah, the combat's fun in the game, but I'm not playing the game for the combat.
See, I play the game for the combat, but also I like to tell in my head, and I get that this is like totally counter to what writers do, but little tiny stories about my multiplayer character. Like, okay, why is he or she here this day fighting these guys? Like what's the point? And then it's like, oh, maybe we were doing this or the other thing or something like that.
I would argue that if you're doing that, then the writer isn't doing their job.
But see,
Well, but the writer doesn't write multiplayer though.
Like if you have to fill in the gaps, and why are the gaps there?
Right.
That's true.
so there is a small amount of writing in the multiplayer, but as another writer on this podcast today, I will say that I'm drawn to games that aren't BioWare games when I'm or BioWare style games that are heavy on story when I'm playing. Like I guess we didn't really talk about the games we were playing at the start.
Oh yeah,
but,
we went to, but yeah.
But like I really find that I'm drawn to games where I'm making my own story through the gameplay. Like the
Yeah.
game
that's one way to do it, and it's a
Shadow
strong
of
way to do
Mordor.
it. Yeah.
The
Logan
actual-
absolutely loves Shadow of
But here,
Mordor.
the thing is, the writing of like the actual dialogue in Shadow of Mordor isn't super special, but the stories that you tell with the mechanics and the gameplay.
It's the
are-
same with the PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. That's why people love it, because you're like, oh, I went to this place and did the cool thing. or
I
whatever.
actually have a whole article about that. The stories you tell through Shadow of Mordor. Sophia, you're burning to say something.
The way I feel about this problem is that I don't think that when you're finding your own story in a game that it's something to champion a game for. I think that it's just pointing you to the stories you want to tell. Like I grew up playing the first Guild Wars game, the full trilogy, and I played it for thousands of hours. And I created a family tree over 200 years about these people who had come to the continent from like merchant ships, and they came together and like, oh, this one character is like asexual, but she eventually settled down to make the descendant in Guild Wars 2 and whatever. And so like I had to come to realize that, like the ArenaNet was not giving me this. And so I was finding it for myself. And it was a consequence not only of me playing the game alone, because I never had any friends who liked Guild Wars, but
Same.
it was just me trying to realize, oh, I want to tell these stories. So why would I champion Guild Wars for that? Why wouldn't I just tell them?
Yeah, but there's a big difference between a game not giving you that and a game giving you the tools purposefully to tell those stories.
Right. Like, I think that Dungeons and Dragons is a perfect example. Like, I like to compare everything to D&D,
Yeah,
but that's because
that's the go-to.
I'm a huge fan. But basically, that to me, that would be like criticizing D&D for not having a built-in story, right? Whereas it's, as you say, Ben, it gives you the tools to tell your own story, right? Because I'm not a developer, right? I can't just go and tell the story I want to tell whenever I feel like doing that, right? So a game that is solid enough that it has like the gameplay components that allow me to act out a character's story in my head is fine for me. But I get what you're saying. Like, if I'm doing that in every single game I'm playing, maybe there's some like writing lacking, but I didn't feel that way about the single player at all of Mass Effect. I felt that way about the multiplayer, which, I mean, to me, it's like the story I get to add in my head to the multiplayer is just a bonus because it's multiplayer.
Well, it's like as a chef, if I can like see a dish and be like, wow, I could use those carrots for this, then like the chef didn't make a meal. It's like I'm looking at the raw ingredients.
But I'm not a chef. I guess that's my point. I'll never be a chef, so I have to take what the chef gives me.
I'm like, I mean, I'm on both minds. I think both Ben and Sophia and Logan, you all have good points. But I mean, there's one thing, and there's games obviously that give you the tools to tell stories. Even like when you think of even just like The Sims or actually, The Sims is the best thing. They don't tell stories, but you create your own. You create your own families. You create your own worlds and towns and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, when you think about games like, especially when Destiny 1 was coming out, and Destiny 1 kept being like, oh, we're going to have really cool, unique armor and weapons that you're going to be like, oh, how did you get that? And then you'll tell the story of how you got the whatever. And I'm like,
sick, Jara's Wrath.
And I'm like, A, that didn't happen. And B, best parts of Destiny's story was like in the Grimoire cards, were in these weird sort of subversive and interesting stories. Like, but that's what Bungie does well. So when Bungie was like, you'll tell your own stories, I'm like, no, Bungie, please don't. Oh, what are you doing? And for all, from what I've seen, Destiny 2 seems to fix a lot of that, which also thinking about Destiny 2, when you think about a series that had such a turbulent time, like, I mean, Mass Effect 3 or Dragon Age 2, and then managed, again, Destiny 1 also had like a managed to turn around with this new release. I guess it is possible, but it takes forever and a lot of money.
To turn around a game franchise?
I mean, Destiny 1 had such a turbulent time, and then for Destiny 2 to be like, yeah, it's mostly better. Everyone really likes it. It's had a lot of positive talk around it lately. So I guess, I mean, that Activision threw a lot of money at it. So that's one way to fix the problem. But I was going to ask, like, what do you guys think about sort of fixing problems from previous games in new releases? Is that something you should do? Is it something you should avoid? And like, if you were to try to kind of fix narrative issues or like thematic issues, how would you do it?
Well, I mean, it seems sort of pointless in Andromeda to like bring up, the Krogan War in the Andromeda Galaxy. It's like, no, you're in the Andromeda Galaxy. Like, we're in this together. We agreed to do this new thing. Why are you bringing up this old problem? I feel the way about any intellectual property, really, is that I'm more interested in new stories than hashing out past judgments, because often like we've reached new conclusions that need to be included.
Yeah.
And I think that when you're working on a new installment, it depends on how closely that installment is related to the thing that came before it. If you're continuing the story, then obviously you're going to hit on a lot of the same things, because you're using the same tools to tell a story that pushes forward the stories that came before it.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a game like Andromeda, you're hitting a soft reset basically, but it's still told with the same technology and species of aliens, and so you're pulling in those things, and you're referring to them where you have to. But with Andromeda as an entity, that is where a lot of the story is coming from, and it needs to come from, because you're not going to tell stories that you left back home. That's gone. You're going to tell stories that are now in your face. And Andromeda, like I find it really interesting to think about Andromeda as a sort of a TV show as well, because that's in a large part how it was written. You had teams that would go off and tell that episode within the the confines of, or confines is the wrong word because it's huge, but within the scope of the galaxy, you have this story being told for an hour with these characters in this place, and then you go on to the next one and they all fit together in this broader arc, or they don't, and they're just happening to they just happen to be a thing that's happening in this world at that time. But it all sort of comes together to tell in sometimes a messy story, but a story about what it's like to come to this new place and not know what to expect.
I think that's where Andromeda shines its brightest, is in those individual stories. Like we were talking about that before the show, Colin. The missions, the loyalty missions, the loyalty missions specifically are just really good. They're really, really well written and told, and they're fun to play. So yeah, I am going to go back and I think play it as a more like serialized adventure.
Well, I mean, it's sounding like the best parts of Andromeda are when you have those character moments and you have those interpersonal things, and they start to lose their footing when you start to think about the bigger picture.
Yeah, I got to stop playing it for the big picture. That was 1, 2, 3 talk.
I just want to say, Logan, that I appreciate you being like number 4 or maybe number 5 of the people I have convinced to play Mass Effect Andromeda.
Well,
just by talking about it around them.
The TV series.
I'm also going to play.
Yeah, the TV series analogy was like really, really beneficial.
It was for me too. Yeah,
I didn't even think about playing that game that way because I'm hard coded to play Mass Effect games the way Mass Effect games play.
Yeah,
right. This isn't a Mass Effect game so much as it is a Mass Effect universe adjacent game.
It's like if you it's almost as different as like when you think about Mario games. Like you would not play Mario Kart the same way you play Super Mario.
Totally, yeah. I need to definitely.
But they're both good games for different reasons.
Yeah.
But if you go to Star Trek, what is Star Trek about? Is it about exploring the galaxy and going to strange new places? But then what do you do with Deep Space Nine when it's suddenly in that setting, but it's a space station? And it's a lot less about exploring as it is about politics and this very fixed setting.
Yeah, each franchise or each property uses the universe to tell a story. And so Andromeda is like, it's taking that universe and it's like, well, what if we just took these themes or this focus and we investigated that down a new direction with new people?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think it's fair to really hold the next generation up to the original series because like they had different problems they were looking to solve in different contexts in our own history, but they can still use the same parts and go down a different road, and it can still be equally good in different ways.
That makes sense. And to go back to Mass Effect, specifically like the character moments, do you have any moments that stand out to you that you didn't write? Sort of any moment from Andromeda? I would say one from Andromeda and one from the original trilogy.
I already referenced it because I love it so much, but the Vetra cooking scene with the I'm making air quotes here, cat cow. I just love the humor in that scene. Cheryl Chi, who wrote it, just did like a phenomenal job with making a romantic scene something that isn't typical of romance in games, really just making it an awkward but endearing moment. So I really love that scene, and because of it, I like to recommend Vetra as a romance for a lot of people.
And for the original trilogy?
Oh, for the original trilogy, God, I mean, are we talking necessarily moments that I liked? Because when I say liked, I can really appreciate a moment that pisses me the heck off.
Yeah, that's true.
And maybe the moment in the first Mass Effect that sticks with me to this day, and when I play at home, I play for keeps. Like I do not go back. I play one canon playthrough, and that is my canon Shepard. I'll play other games, like other playthroughs, but I have my canon Shepard. And in my canon playthrough, Rex dies in the first game. And I think that is amazing because as a fan, it's like, oh my God, now there are two entire games worth of stories where I will never see Rex, and other people will get to experience Rex. And Rex, and I'm just like, but he's dead. And like, of course, Ashley had to go after that, and
jeez,
and it was just like
Ashley's always the one to go.
Thank you, but
hashtag kill Caden.
No space racist.
Yeah, no.
Caden is inoffensive.
Caden is inoffensive.
Yes. and in ME3 has a really good romance arc, honestly.
Yeah,
But
he's at least a step above Jacob.
so yeah, so like I really love that moment in the first game and hate it.
Sophia.
So to explain this, to preface this, I think I have to explain why I appreciate the Mass Effect trilogy so much, and maybe it's BioWare in general. I haven't played any other BioWare franchises, but Mass Effect lets me emphatically describe a story that only I can have in a way that is only matched by games that use emergent systems. Like people will describe like, oh, in Breath of the Wild, this happened over here, and it was so cool. And I'd be like, what? You can do that? I didn't even know. I can't really experience that with anything that isn't just a BioWare game like a Mass Effect. Like I could sit here and be like, hey, isn't it great how Mass Effect 1 opens with Keith David being like, Shepard doesn't give a fuck about anything, and that's why she's great.
Yeah,
like that's how it started.
Yeah,
for
that's
me.
true. Forgot about that.
Like he was just talking about how I didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
And why that was so good.
And it's such a good, like, in the year, whatever, and then, like, we found a colony on Mars, and it's, like, Mass Effect.
Or I can talk about how Mass
the
Effect
music's so
1
good.
Mass Effect 1 ended with me talking the antagonist into killing himself.
Yeah.
And when I said that to someone, they were like, you can do that? And I was like, yeah, didn't you? Didn't you just, like, shout at him until he shot himself in the head? And they're like, no, people don't usually do that, Sophia. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm just a bad person.
I did that totally, too. That was fun.
But that's the power of Mass Effect trilogy to me is to explain these amazing things that happened only to me, but presenting it in a way that makes me guide a whole trilogy of isolated stories.
Yeah. So what's one of your favorite ones?
Good question. From the first one or from the Andromeda? Because I can start with Andromeda first.
Yeah, let's do Andromeda first.
I keep thinking about fucking PB and 0G. It's a really goofy moment because I didn't like PB at all.
Yeah.
Pelessaria Vasile, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
Until I really started to get to know her a little bit better. When I was hanging around with her in Vetra and the Nomad, we would come back and I'd be like, you know what, I want to get to know you a bit better. And then eventually she kept being flirtatious. I was like, well, maybe I'll do it because Vetra is just shutting me out entirely. And so it's just this really goofy sequence where you don't see anything, but you're like, ow, oof, this is more hurtful than I thought it was going to be. Whereas like my playthrough of the Mass Effect trilogy was my blue wife Liara to the end. Experiencing life with PB for that one moment. I never ended up dating her. It made emblematic the silly factors in Andromeda, like, oh wow, these are really just kids, like really trying their best out here.
It really isn't shy away from being goofy
and
in
like
a charming way.
The only reason that like there's so much combat in Andromeda to me is because you inherited the skills of your father accidentally. Like you have the movements of an N7 agent because this partner who is also you, like, is bringing it to you directly from your ancestor in a way that's sort of estranging you from yourself, but is also making this this partner relationship with another part of you. And I think that everyone talking to you as if you were like a system of people emphasizes that as well. Everyone's talking about like, what does Sam think about that? Like, it's like Sam is like your alternate personality or something, but you can, because they can also access Sam separately. It's about getting in touch with another part of you that they can't reach.
Yeah.
And so you have to converse with them to translate what that other side of you is saying. And so you become not just a person, but like a team in one body in a way that's really intriguing to me. Anyway, so back to Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. I really like how Mass Effect 2 opens.
Oh, okay,
It's not afraid to go back to like everything that you had experienced in the first game and just destroy it.
Yeah.
When we were playing it, my partner was watching me and she just started clapping and she was like, that was the strongest opening I've ever seen. Because it's just like, after wrecking everything that you had done in the first game, it just says Mass Effect 2. Yeah. And it's just like, oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, there was nothing more amazing and spectacular than that, for sure. I have to agree. Like, just the ship blowing up and you're like, what the fuck do I do now? Like, I thought I would have the Normandy and my peeps.
Yeah.
Like, that's how you start a game.
Yeah.
That moment when it's like, because I played this just as a fan, that moment where it's like everything's going wrong, everything's exploding, and then you just step out and it's open space.
Yeah,
and it's
just silent.
dead silent, and you just see
Fuck.
everything sort of like in space disintegrate, like just falling apart, and you're like, fuck.
Fuck is the
Yeah, you're like
epitome of the Mass Effect 2
just like
intro.
Shepard looking and going, ah, fuck.
sure.
Logan, what about you for Andromeda in the original?
So, I'm gonna get his name wrong. I remember he's the character that is kind of at odds with Sloane on Kadara.
Reyes?
Yeah, Reyes. Okay.
Oh, I love Reyes.
Betraying Reyes was my favorite moment.
No.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna high
How
five you
could-
right here.
Taking the shot.
No.
Bam. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was so
He's an
good.
asshole.
Yeah, for sure. And I just don't like people that are that opportunistic. You know what I mean? That because I felt like he was gonna screw me over, so I felt like doing that would be like a really really good like got you first, you know. And also he's a bad guy. At least Sloane was trying to run Kadara. You know the what were they called, the collective. The collective were just messing stuff up. Wasn't a fan.
I'm not going to say you're wrong
Yeah.
because every player is right.
But you're wrong.
But Reyes was like my canon romance.
Oh no way.
And like,
Yeah, I totally shot at him big time.
Not just shot at him, you shot him.
Yeah.
the rebel bad boy who's trying to make things better for the proles and on this you know, freewheeling crazy desert, poisonous desert planet. Like, I don't know, then it's super smooth right from the start. That's not appealing.
Your writer has a type, bad boy.
Sloane was already in the chair, and that place was that had so much instability already. So it was like, why am I going to shake things up on a shook planet? You know what I mean? I'm going to just try and doctor Sloane into what I need for Kadara. That was how I was feeling.
But see, now we're that's your perspective on politics versus mine a little bit. You know, the working with
Working with
person
what you
who's-
got.
with what
Yeah.
you got versus blowing up the system and
Yeah.
hoping that when the dust settles, it's going to be a little bit better.
Or rather, that's how I approach politics through my writer. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's how I feel about things in the world, but that's how that writer felt, right? As for the, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, like, but then do you? Is that a well written moment? Is that like in a game that had a lot of turnoffs for you? This moment did resonate, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
So that episode was one that was memorable.
And exactly. Now that I need to reframe my mind for Mass Effect Andromeda. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
I
need to,
canceled
like,
it too early.
I need to, like, as Colin would say, put it in boxes. You
Yeah.
know, like
Everything has a box.
yeah, exactly. And as for the original trilogy, this is kind of a crappy answer because like a lot of people have this answer, but Morden dying
Hmm.
helped my
Spoiler.
shepherd grow.
What?
In terms of like, so you've got this guy who's like committed these like unspeakable acts in terms of like the Genophage and the Krogan War and stuff like that, and then Genophage 2, Genophage Harderer, and it's like he's up there at the terminal, and he's saying like, it perfectly espouses his character in the two things he says, like it had to be me, anyone else would have gotten it wrong, and it's that arrogance, like I'm much smarter than all of you,
Whoa, you took that away from it?
but
I did not take
I
that away
need
from
to
it.
pay for what I did. There's two things there for me. At least that's how my shepherd saw it, and it was like,
I took it as more as a sad realization. Like it had to be him. Like just because he was the one that had to be. Like yeah.
I love that your shepherd has consequences because mine just kicks people out of windows and she still lives at the end.
my shepherd learned from Morden in that like, oh, I don't want to die, and part of me has always done these things to save the world, partly because I don't want to die, but I might have to die. I might be the one who dies here. That's what my shepherd learned from Morden, right? Like that even someone so arrogant and self-sure as Morden would be so self-sure to die.
I took the similar lesson from my moment. So I haven't played too much of Andromeda, so I can't really speak to too much of it. I did really like the mission. I'm bad at remembering all these things. Going into the fortress on the winter planet.
Vold, I believe.
Yeah.
No, it's Novaria.
Yeah, it's Novaria.
Vold is cold.
Yeah, Volt is cold. So doing that one was a standout for me, just because Jawl's interactions with Ryder really stood out. but for the original trilogy, I think it was all. So I romanced Thane, and it was all the moments in 2, and especially the moments in 3 of him, sort of. I just love Thane as a character. He's such a strong character, and I love his philosophies and his interactions with his son and his views on the world. And I liked him and Shepard being together. He had such a calming presence on my Shepard, at least. Like, she was such a bundle of emotions and danger, and always was like felt like she was on the edge of losing it. Like, she just was constantly like shit happened over and over and over again, and just Thane was a calming presence in her life. And and then him dying was so fucking sad. Oh, that crushed me and my Shepard entirely. It was such a well-written moment, and like him going out like a badass too, and like fighting Kai Lang and like rescuing the council, and all that was so cool, and it felt like such a good moment for him and for my Shepard. I felt a little bad when then I started romancing Samantha Trainer afterwards. But oops, that was an accident. But also the moment with Samantha Trainer, her toothbrush and Citadel is really good. But Thane was like a stand-up for me for the entire trilogy.
Cool.
That's my Mass Effect thing.
We all got our moments, yeah.
Yeah. We're running really long on time here. We're gonna wrap this up. I'm gonna leave you all with one last question. Oh, do you have one more?
We could just keep talking.
We could just keep talking. But I will leave you all with one last question. 2 last questions. I lied.
3, 4.
4. 2 last questions. One really quick, easy thing, and one's a longer answer. If we can go around the table and you can tell me your favorite character from the entire series. Just your favorite character. Just your.
For me, it's definitely going to be Morden, just because of that scene.
Yeah.
That scene still, like, I can't believe that, because like, I'm not going to say like I'm smarter than anybody, but sometimes I get a little arrogant, and it was humbling for me to watch Morden behave the way he did and be like, oh man, maybe if he can be that way, I can be that way.
Yeah. Sophia?
My favorite character is Shepard because it's me.
Okay, not Shepard.
I just love me.
Anyone but the Shepard, and I'll say squad mate.
You can say like Sarah Ryder's your favorite character. She's
That's
not
true.
you.
Yeah, Ryder actually, yeah.
I like Ryder a lot, but I don't identify with her. I mean, I'm always wondering what would she do, and I sort of plot the progression accurately, but I wouldn't say like, oh, she's my favorite character because of what she is.
I like that answer actually.
I mean, Legion.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
I adore. It's sort of, I come at it from like, I just love robos learn how to feel, or learn how to understand non-robo stories. Localhost is available on right now.
Localhost is about the opposite,
but it's still like those themes. Just like I love them, and and Legion to me is like, I love Legion's story. I wish that, I don't want to get into like, I wish that I could have Legion with me forever instead of what happens in ME3, but as a fan, but then also like Drac, just because I put so much into Drac, and I love to see how much joy people get out of Space Grandpa. And so from a developer perspective, I feel like I'm really proud of Drac. From a player perspective, I love Legion, and
nice. I mean, Thane for obvious reasons that I mentioned, but I also I was gonna say Kasumi because I really like her DLC and her character, and
the
her
DLC is just really good.
And her her interactions with her lover and things like that, and like her whole trying to figure out that stuff. But then I was thinking about Kasumi, and I was like, fuck, Liara's there, and Liara's growing from naive archaeologist into shadow broker is such a fun arc, and her sarcasm and her wit is like just through the entire trilogy. It's just one of my favorite parts.
I think Liara's like a really downplayed tragedy is that, like, I mean, because my Shepard was so cold and just got even colder as time went on. It just became like, oh, Liara is that way too. Like, we're both becoming very like distant, harsh people, and that's the tragedy of what war has done to us.
Oh man, that's dark. Well, last question to leave you on.
It was like way darker than you were like, hey, Liara's story is a fun story. And then it's like, no, it's a tragedy. And then you're like, shit.
It
Next
is.
question.
Last question is, where do you think Mass Effect goes from here? What's the future of Mass Effect, and what would you like the future of Mass Effect to
After
be?
2 years, they decide to do another thing, but it'll be a while.
Yeah. What story would you want to see?
I want to see more. Andromeda's not done.
Yeah.
Like okay, spoiler alert again. There are 3 threads in Andromeda that just get completely left. That's it. And it like they're phrased like we're about to deal with them, but then it just sort of concludes and you're done.
Isn't there an entire arc that's missing still?
There's 2, aren't there?
We're missing 1 arc.
Oh, okay.
Quarians.
My bad.
There's also I don't want to spoil it for you guys. You're gonna go play it after this.
Oh, I'm still gonna go play it, whether I know the spoiler or not.
There's a murder mystery because the founder of the initiative was
John
murdered.
Garson.
Oh, yeah.
And there's some benefactor that no one knows about that's hinted at, and you're like, okay, who is that? And then we never really talk about it. And then it turns out that your dad put Sam into you and not Cora because he's like, I did all of this so your mom could be with us in the future. And I was like, oh, my dad, he actually tried something. He's not just being like a distant jerk. And then it turns out that like your mom is in the freezer under a different name, and so you and Scott, or you and Sarah, whatever, you're like, Mom's here. We can be a family together without Dad. Oh my God. Well, okay.
Dad's
and
a
then
jerk.
Never really gets addressed. You never thought your mom,
right.
and like your mom was so ready to die that she would not be happy with what happened.
Okay.
I know the benefactor thing. Didn't they hint at it being Cerberus? Like there was Cerberus.
I wish it
ties?
was Cerberus, but I don't think it's Cerberus.
Okay.
Like there's.
Are we done with Cerberus?
It's not just
Like,
humans.
Yeah.
Like it's like there's way too much diversity for Cerberus to be like cool with it.
I'm just keeping my mouth shut for all of this conversation.
Do you know spoilers?
NDA.
Well, I mean, when you write these games, you're not putting everything into one game,
That's
right?
true.
Like
There's a cutting room floor.
and you have sort of longer threads in mind as well. So not being at BioWare anymore, I also just look forward to whatever stories will come out of what the threads that Andromeda started to weave.
That's like a perfectly diplomatic answer that tells us like nothing. But thank you.
No, it's a good note to end on.
I want to see somewhere that they go next, though. I have
Just somewhere.
I have a good idea.
Okay, what's your idea?
It's like
Pitch it. I'm
Really?
a BioWare exec.
okay, so it's
Let's hear it. Come on.
it's a totally different kind of game. It's
Okay.
like nothing like a Mass Effect game. So again, I'll have to like mentally frame myself better or whatever I
Is there a
said
deluxe
earlier.
edition? Can we get pre-orders on this?
Yeah. Okay. So it's the like essentially first contact with the Turians, but you're on that ship that went down, and it's like basically a horror game like Dead Space, where you're navigating a like totally coked out ship. Maybe it's yours, maybe it's theirs. The fighting was bloody, maybe, right? But it's everybody knows it's the Turians, obviously, but they're so like they're behind their space armor and shit like that, and it's like, ooh, maybe they're not, because the race relations between humans and Turians have crazy changed since the first game, right? Or the first, second, third. And I think that like that whole like everybody knows it's the Turians, but they're acting like this evil menace. But then are we the evil menace because we're the ones like invading their space, or are we? Are we just exploring? But it's like basically a horror game.
The
That's my
stakes have
idea.
never been lower.
Yeah.
It's like, we
Just-
know exactly what happens after this,
Just
but what if?
completely hone in on like one story and just make it super linear.
Well,
That's like a novelization idea, though. It's not really
Yeah.
like a game idea.
and the Dead Space team is making Star Wars games, so.
All right, fine.
Imagine how many people would be mad about that, though.
Yeah, that's the thing. You're like, well, my Mass Effect.
Right.
RPG.
But I mean, like, I think that if we're gonna
Yeah.
start playing games like Andromeda and taking them in a bit of a different light, why don't we just go all the way, right?
Yeah.
Like Mass Effect and Rabbids Kingdom. That's
merge of rabbits with everything.
You guys didn't let me finish. Like,
There is some crossover with Little Big Planet.
yeah, there you
You
go.
can play Drac in Little Big Planet.
That's true.
So adorable.
Isn't there a Mass Effect? Oh, and then I also have an N7 armor in Rock Band, so in Rock Band 4.
And Garden Warfare.
And Garden Warfare. There
Which-
you go.
Which, if you like the multiplayer in Mass Effect, the multiplayer, which is Garden Warfare, is pretty fun. I want to, like, if we're just sort of wrapping up here, there's a thing you said probably like an hour ago where you implied that only 12 people played Mass Effect 3's multiplayer.
Mhm.
I take great umbrage with that because as somebody who also played way too long.
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah.
man, like Mass Effect 3's multiplayer was
It was actually very good.
well played,
and
tons of people played it.
Not catered. Well, taken care of for a year. They put a lot of content out for
like
at a long
supported,
lifespan.
well
well supported.
Yeah.
That's the word I'm looking for.
I mean,
Well
that,
catered.
that was their microtransaction model. We got to keep feeding it.
That's true.
And I did.
How did the Dragon Age Inquisition multiplayer work out?
I didn't play Dragon Age Inquisition
I don't.
You didn't play it at all?
at all.
At all?
Well, okay.
At all?
Here's what happened. So I got into Dragon Age when Dragon Age 2 came out, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna play all the DragonAge games. I started playing one.
There was only 2.
Three.
I know.
I mean,
know.
at that point.
Right. So I'm like, I'm gonna start them because this, and I started playing one, and the one thing that has never happened to me in games happened to me, and I got motion sickness. Yeah, I'm like, what the hell is this? So I kept throwing up trying to get through like the starter castle in one, and then I visited it a couple more times, like in later days, thinking like, oh, maybe I was just sick that day. No, Dragon Age 1 just makes me throw up.
Have you tried playing it PC with isometric
It's
perspective?
No, because it's been so long now. Like I'd have to get through 2 whole games to get to Inquisition.
Yeah.
That's so long.
These are entertainment, they're not like you don't have to like do work.
They're not a chore.
Well, and that's the thing.
They're games.
Maybe I should just play Inquisition
That's true. You could also just go in without
having played the first 2.
You never do that. You like to play all the
I
lead
know.
up games
Yeah.
in a weird way.
Yeah.
But it is a new protagonist in 3, so you could just pick it
True.
up and
You could also just play 2.
You can read all the books too.
Oh, so whispering
there are a
doesn't
lot of
track
books.
super well on the podcast, but
you could read all the books. There's many
You
books.
could read
okay.
all of the books.
that's better. I'm looking at the waveform. That's way better.
That's wave better.
Wave better.
Oh, good. Okay, now we're just getting into nonsense.
Yeah. News
Um,
or screw the news.
No, whatever. We're almost at 2 hours.
Yeah, screw the news.
Screw the news. It's been fun talking Mass Effect.
It's been fun talking.
Yay. It was enlightening. I'm gonna go play more Andromeda.
I'm going to go play more Andromeda multiplayer.
I've played too much Andromeda, and I'm not going to play anymore.
Ben, how about are you gonna play some more Andromeda?
My
Single bead of sweat.
my partner has recently been playing some Andromeda,
Okay.
and it's weird to watch someone else play. I don't know if I like it because I'm looking at all the things, whether or not I did them. Then I'm like, oh, I should have done that, or I could have done that better, or like after the game comes out, it's so hard to look at it and not be super like, oh, I wish I had done this or I wish I had done that.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
To end off on. If Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 are Shepard's story, is Andromeda Ryder's story in the end? Or
No.
is it someone else's? Because I've seen people make arguments that actually Andromeda is Jaal's story. And I find I'm putting that out there because I think it's an interesting theory.
Yeah, I mean, even just Ryder's less of a player insert than Shepard is, and then Ryder also needs a lot of their crew and needs a lot of their support system to actually make it through in a way that Shepard didn't. And then at the end of the day, too, a lot of the things that they're working for like are centered around Jaal or the Initiative. Thoughts?
I always thought that Andromeda was a not so much a story in itself as it was a jumping off point, which was really, really saddening because as much as like I had issues with that Andromeda, whatever they were, I was really looking forward to Andromeda 2, like as a like punchy, good follow up.
Yeah.
So the news that it's still up in the air after that is not so great news for me.
I mean, BioWare is busy with Anthem and will be for the next
Jara's Fist or Jara's
20
Wrath.
years.
I do want to revise my answer about what I'd like to see from a next where Mass Effect goes next. I'd like to see Andromeda retold, but I controlled Jaren Tan.
Oh man! Oh, as like a management sim.
Yeah, and just having to deal with Ryder.
Oh no!
Yeah, everything I say is stilted, poorly performed. I'm trying to think about that Jaal question. I think it's difficult because what you're pointing to is the fact that he has a full arc, but I also think that Ryder has a full arc as well. It's about Ryder coming into their own, but it's also about like Joel's discovery about himself, in a way that complicates it, which is also part of why Andromeda is so messy. Because
It's a coming of age story for every character.
it's not cohesive because of that. It's like he has a full story. That was a weird little accident. Like I'm like the side character in this. It's like Big Trouble in Little China. It's like it's not really my story, but I'm just here too. Like
I mean, again, the whole TV show thing. I mean, that happens more in TV shows than movies, where like the side characters actually have a full character arc and plot line and side stories. And today's the Joel episode. Great. Like that happens more in TV than it does in movies. You don't stop for half an hour of a movie and we're like, no, we're going to talk about this one guy now.
Oh, I remember now. Oh gosh, for a really good moment from Andromeda that wasn't just having sex. Oh God, what is his name? God, it's been a while. He's with Korra. He's the other one.
Oh, Liam.
Oh, Liam.
Liam's
The other
loyalty,
one?
Yeah, the other one. When there's two who you're with on the first mission. Anyhow, Liam's loyalty mission involves like a derelict vessel.
It's
that's
so insane. The
so
whole thing's crazy.
poorly managed, and it's just like the funniest thing I've ever played.
Yeah, it's really good.
It involves like you and Liam just like hanging up on this terrible salvage operation.
Literally,
like 3 times.
hanging up the phone. Yeah, like
There's like, why does everyone just keep hanging up on me? And I was like, it's because like you're not important. We're talking about our development. Go away. Like,
Yeah.
Again, that's a really good episode of Andromeda. Remember that?
Yeah.
one?
Remember when Andromeda had a movie night? That was fun.
Yeah, so did Enterprise.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
a weird little coincidence.
Yeah. Star Trek fans and BioWare. Well, that's Star Trek fans everywhere. Cool. That's been our Mass Effect podcast. It's massive. Sorry for the 2 hours mark.
I think a topic that big, especially with such big hitters for guests. Thanks for coming, by the way, guys. This is awesome.
Thanks.
Deserved that
For
much
having us.
time.
That's true. Yeah. We definitely didn't want to cut this one short.
Yeah.
It was good to unpack Mass Effect and figure out what the hell it is.
It's Andromeda length.
Yeah.
Roll credits. I don't know.
Yeah. So should we release some DLC for this episode? Did we come up if we ever revisit anything? Yeah, but that'll be it for us here at Third Person. This week we have on the website we have actually we pre-record our episode, so I'm not actually sure what's going up next week. I have to look at the content schedule. But if you are looking at the site, we have an article up from Kate Haynes about Planet Coaster. We have an article about some Hand-Eye Society stuff coming up near the end of the month. Damage Campus at the end of the month. Shout out to DMG and Mains Making Games. Go check that conference out on the 29th and 30th. We'll be there. And also, I'll be talking to Tanya Khan from Vivid Foundry about Solid State and VR very soon as well. And also, we'll be talking to other guests next week maybe as well. There's a whole thing. We got a busy month. But thank you for joining us for this podcast. And as always, thanks for listening. Thank you again to Sophia and Ben for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
It was a blast.
Thanks.
I was gonna say that we both have games at Damage Camp, so
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. Go
quick
check out their
little
games.
plug,
I'm
Yeah.
also a director with DMG, so
Excellent.
I can't say too much, but
plug.
Sweet. Yay. Okay. We'll be back soon, guys. Thanks for listening.